Hello, Trombone Internet. This is Chris Van Hoff, assistant to the regional manager of the International Trombone Festival. We at the festival, of course, are huge fans of the pod, and we are really excited to invite you to attend this year's 2024 International Trombone Festival at TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. Dave Begnosh is our host. We have the world premiere of a brand new double concerto for trombone and piano with the Fort Worth Symphony. We have the American Brass Quintet. We have late night jazz featuring a Latin jam session. Like, everything is happening. All the cast will be there. It's the best hang in the world, and we hope to see you there. You can register for the festival still online at www.internationaltrombonefestival.com, and it's happening the last week of May. So go register. We'll see you in Texas.
Welcome to the Trombone Retreat, podcast of the Third Coast Trombone Retreat. Today on the podcast, we hang out with Colin Williams, Associate Principal Trombone of the New York Philharmonic. My name is Sebastian Vera, and I'm joined as always by the best short rib ragu chef this side of the Mississippi, Nick Schwartz. How's it going, Nicholas?
Good now. I got some accolades for my short rib ragu that I made you last week.
Dude, I'm still thinking about it.
And so are the Novas, apparently. I get texts from them.
So now, like, every time Nick visits Pittsburgh, Lindsay Nova, Jim Nova's wife, requires that he cooks pasta, but no one complains.
Yeah, not requests, requires. Even if I'm not staying with him, apparently, I have to make her pasta. So it's a task that I enjoy, at least.
It's the cross you have to bear.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, we are everywhere. So please subscribe so you'll get a notification whenever we post a podcast. Today, we had an awesome talk with Colin Williams. Colin is a former guest artist at the retreat, and I just love hanging out with him. He's one of those people that I always kind of feel like I'm on the same wavelength with. He's just a really introspective person, a real deep thinker. He's really thought about everything he said. And we talk about how he found a new identity through a real huge and unexpected curveball in his life.
Yeah, and kind of going along with what he was talking about in the podcast, he wrote me afterwards and said, "Was everything okay? You know, I want to make sure that we got to all the topics you wanted to get to." He's just very thoughtful, and I just really appreciate being around him.
Cool. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. We have some news that we're willing to announce, but we are circling the third week of August. We have confirmed a lot of things for the 2021 Third Coast Trombone Retreat. We will have more details soon. So stay tuned to all of our social media and our website. We'll be announcing guest artists, application deadlines, special features. But we're really excited that we're coming back this year.
In person.
In person. This episode is brought to you by Houghton Horns. I assume all of your instruments after this year are nice and dirty. So send your trombone to Houghton Horns. They're offering 10% off. Early bird special for full cleaning service, including ultrasonic cleaning, minor accessible dents, and general polish for silver instruments. And you can schedule now through May 31st.
So fresh and so clean.
For more information, visit houghtonhorns.com. You know, Nick likes to just stick a dryer sheet through his trombone.
Mm-hmm.
But this actually, ultrasonic actually does a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dryer sheet's pretty good, though. Maybe I'll give it a try sometime.
Some, sixth graders are going to try that now.
Yep.
I haven't seen you in person since I guess the retreat.
Yeah, God, that seems like 5,000 lifetimes ago.
Yeah, no kidding. For many reasons.
Oh, you have the recommended drink, I see.
It's the daytime version of it, I suppose. I ran out of coffee, sadly.
Oh, so it's the virgin. It's the virgin Crown and Coke.
It is. Just trying to get some caffeine in the system.
Totally understand. Absolutely.
How early are you usually waking up with the kids?
Lately they've been starting to get up around, like Christopher's getting up around 6:30. And so that's early for me. I've never been like a super daytime, like morning kind of person. So this morning he got up and it wasn't too bad. I managed to go back to sleep for a little bit, and Nikki took him. She was up at 6 for some reason.
Super mom.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have a good Mother's Day?
Yeah, it was very nice. And we had both, Nikki's mom was visiting. So they had their Nana was there, in addition to their mom for Mother's Day. So it was nice. And Nikki's birthday was on the 5th, so it's been like a lot of stuff this week.
Celebrate Nikki month.
Mm-hmm. No, I got her one of those cameos where William Frakes wished her, saying like a happy birthday, Commander Riker. Riker birthday for her. It was awesome.
Is she a big Star Trek person?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just make this whole interview about Nikki.
She'll come down later.
Tell me about your wife.
She'll probably come down later with Alex. He's home today. He's got a cold. We had to do this whole thing. Anytime a kid gets a sniffle now, you have to go get him a COVID test. So
Really?
God.
yeah, I mean, because if he's going to go back to daycare,
Yeah, of course.
they got to be sure. And there's no vaccine for the real young ones yet. So that's probably going to happen in September. So
Is that do they have to do the nasal swab for the little ones?
they have now. They can do like just an oral swab.
Yeah, because I imagine with the little ones, it's with the nasal swab. Oh my god.
We had to do that a couple times early on. And it was pretty rough. They get pretty upset by it. So
Yeah, usually kids get upset by a haircut. I can't imagine
yeah,
shoving something up their nose.
it's pretty rough, man.
Yeah. That's wow. I hadn't thought about that until this moment because I don't think, I have two nephews. I don't think they've had to have COVID tests because they were mainly doing remote learning. So
Yeah.
I don't think that they had to.
We've been sending the boys to school all year, but that's meant like, for the older one, it's been like weekly COVID tests. And they do like for the whole school, like staff and everyone. It's like crazy. So, and then with the younger, like the youngest ones, like in the twos programs, basically anytime anyone gets a sniffle, you're out for a week almost, like, and getting COVID tested and that kind of thing. So
Wow.
Like they don't even mess around.
they kind of don't. And you can't blame them. And then everything's cohorted. Like, so there's like no mixing of grades or classrooms or like they basically like have everyone walled off. So even if there was someone who got to school with COVID, that there wouldn't be like widespread transmission. They really don't allow the groups to interact. So it's really something.
We're all just figuring it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how would you describe your year if you had to?
Man, I mean, God, I don't even know where to start. I mean, it's the pandemic started with like a crazy like orchestra negotiation, and I was had to be chair of the committee through this whole thing. We fled New York during that time because we didn't know what was going to happen. We moved in with Nikki's parents, who had a large house out in Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. We stayed there for a few months before we came back to New Jersey, and then just trying to figure out how to like. I lost a couple months at the beginning where I just kind of gave up. I was like, I don't know what's happening. It's all too weird. My practice was terrible, and eventually just trying to figure out, okay, projects, life is moving on. How is it moving on? How do you start interacting with all this stuff? I mean, just like anyone else, I guess we're just trying to get through it, but it was rough. I eventually, it's like, social media became sort of a motivator, trying to learn how to like work on Instagram and that kind of thing and do more of that kind of stuff and find projects and things that I needed to work on that I just really haven't had the time to do because of performing schedules and that kind of stuff. And just eventually just try to get better and hope for the best. I don't know if it's just a rough year for everyone.
I see you really upgraded your gear at home. Saw some pictures. Oh, yeah.
Well, there's that gear. And then if you turn all the way around, because I was there, oh, God, it's probably about a month ago now, wasn't it, Colin?
Yeah. Are you talking about like the green screen area?
Yeah.
Colin's giving us a panoramic view of his studio right now.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing like new microphones and the ring light that I think everyone owns now.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's some cool sound panels. They're supposed to look tacky like mine, egg cartons.
I like yours, Sebastian. I don't know.
Well, thank you.
So why those sound panels right there? Is that just starting jumping off point or?
We sort of put them up there and I'm not sure why we stopped, honestly. We ended up putting up pictures on other things, and then we ended up doing a bigger project upstairs where we soundproofed the entire ceiling. Like, this is an older house, so the ceiling wasn't like, it was this old, gross, kind of like popcorn ceiling kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically put like a whole new layer of soundproofing material and then like another thing of drywall up on the ceiling, and that ended up being the soundproofing that we needed. And so these were just the beginning of a project that we decided we didn't really need, but now they just look kind of cool, so they're still there.
They do.
And can you now practice like when the kids are sleeping?
Yeah, I do that all the time now, actually.
Awesome.
I usually try to cut myself off by about 10:30 these days. I used to be one of these like 2 a.m. practicers, and I just, after everything, I kind of just cut myself off 10:30, 11 at the very latest these days.
Well, I mean, if you're waking up at 6:30 too, I'm sure that's a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean that honestly that changes the perspective a lot. I don't want to practice till 2 and then get up 4 hours later and be like,
So give me some positives from this experience. Like, obviously getting to spend more time with your kids and your wife, of course, but we've all faced these similar challenges, and I think everyone can kind of identify. But I love hearing about, everyone kind of has a unique story about something they discovered or something they always wanted to do that they never really got to do or improved at or got to think about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most sort of left turn thing that I got into was I bought, once we moved to this house in New Jersey, I bought a smoker and started getting into smoking meats. It's something I've always loved to do. When I lived in Atlanta, I really sort of discovered, it's amazing that I didn't really discover it when I was in San Antonio. Like my last day there, someone took me out to like Real Texas Barbecue, and I was like, this is pretty good. What's
Maybe
up
I'll
with
stay.
this? And so when I went to Georgia, I started to find a few barbecue places, and especially when I was living in town, there were 2 or 3 just really great places really nearby. And after a while, when the pandemic hit and we were moving, I was like, well, I got all this time. I've always wanted to do this, so let me look into it. So I started going through this thing. Do I want like a pellet smoker? Do I want like a stick burner? Do I want like a Kamado? What do I want to do with this thing? And so I eventually bought like a Kamado and like a bunch of little toys to go with it, and just kind of dove right in. So it's been really fun, like learning how to like deal with a brisket or like deal with like ribs, which I'm still trying to improve at. And pulled pork has been like a real great, how easy that is actually is amazing. Like how easy it is to make like an awesome pulled pork. I love that. And that's been like a super fun thing for me. And it's also really great for Nikki because she loves ribs. Like that's like her thing, go to ribs. So I keep trying to get better. My last couple have been pretty good. So, but that's been like the thing, like trying to get more into smoking. Like I said, the time with the family has been amazing. The time to get to know my in-laws a little bit better. I mean, thank God they like me, because we brought the whole family in, and basically tore their house apart for 6 months, with this, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old just pulling down everything everywhere. It's like their living room looked basically like a toy pit, basically instead of a ball pit, it's like you could look down from the upstairs and just looked like toys and everything everywhere. Yeah, the family stuff, I in a way, I think about going back to my schedule before, and I don't know that I really want to. I don't want to be as busy as I was away from the family as much as I was. I think that's something I didn't really think about when I was in it, because we just get so fixated on like, do the gig, work, do the gig. Oh, there's this thing. And, I'll see the kids on the weekend. I'll only see them a little bit here and there. And I don't know if I want to go back to that.
So how would that happen for you? How could you, when we do go back to whatever normal is, how do you slow it down? How do you keep part of this silver lining going forward?
I mean, that's just tough. I think that's the whole thing about trying to balance opportunities versus family and trying to really prioritize. And I'm someone who, for most of my career, like I would basically like say yes to everything, almost no matter what it was, because it was like, oh, this person's playing, they're fun. That's gonna be a great time. Oh, they're doing this thing. Oh, it's a little busy. I'm going to do it. I think it'll be fun, blah, blah, blah. And I just sort of get in this habit. I enjoy playing. I enjoy being with people. I enjoy being in a section of people who are really just enthusiastic about music. I sometimes sit at home and think it's like, wow, I could have gone out and done a lot of things and made a lot of money if it wasn't for this like music addiction, but it's like this thing where there is something about it that it is just such an incredibly like an experience that when I'm playing a piece, it's weird. It's I get into this time warp. I can remember the first time I played like Dvorak 8. It's like the very first time I ever played anything in an orchestra, and I can vividly remember because of that, like the rehearsal space for the Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra, like at the music camp they did in Maine before the season started, and like trying to learn how to learn tenor clef and like the smell of the cafeteria kind of wafting over, or what it was like to just hang out on the hillside. And for all of these pieces that I performed a lot of things, I have this amazing, I feel like this access to all of these moments in my life. And it becomes this really sort of transcendental kind of experience. And it's tough to get away from it, So sometimes we can get into this thing where it's very perfunctory, where we're counting our rests, time to make the donuts kind of thing. But really on the other end of it, though, if I really sit back, it is something that really kind of goes over the arc of my whole life that is hard to say no to. And yet, when I look at the fact of the fact I need to balance that against my family, my own personal desire to play and to experience this sort of deep connection that I have with the music versus this profound love I have for my family, that has to take priority. So how do you balance all of those things? So that's I guess the question I'm gonna have to figure out. I'm gonna have to really be a little bit more disciplined about like, this is family time. This is the time that I'm just not going to do this, that, or the other, that I'm going to be there and we're going to do these things for my boys. And yet I'm still going to have to carve out the time to do the things I need to do to be able to pursue music making on the level that I would like to pursue it. So,
yeah, I mean, it sounds like in general, you just have a basic, better perspective for your decision making going forward. Like you have a clear idea of what is important to you, and just when the moment arises when you have to make these decisions, you'll be a little clear headed about what actually makes you the happiest. That's amazing. And that's, I think there's a lot of gifts we can get from this.
For sure. I mean,
experience.
I've had 2 hard restarts in my life in terms as it relates to my career anyway. The first one was the injury that I suffered, like that partial tear, that basically cost me like a year of playing in the orchestra, and then many years of battling back for that one. And then, after Christopher was born, after my firstborn, it is this sort of 2 hard restarts. You have to like really reevaluate what's going on and what is important to you.
Well, you could argue this is a 3rd hard restart in a way, going through a pandemic. But we're all going through that restart. There's a camaraderie over this one.
That's true. At least this one is widely shared, So then I think that's what's interesting is like trying to figure out what people have been doing to get through it. Like what has become valuable to you coming out on the other side of this one. If I look back at it from some of my other hard restarts, some of the same lessons still applied. You really find out who your friends are. Like you really find out who are the people who are hanging out with you and like really just want to hang out with you because of you, and who are the people that you just kind of bump into at work and that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is very like you get a laser focus on like who's really in your life, and who's really part of your life in that way, and it's been amazing to me that the people that I've met over the years, even from the very first injury, who I was friends with then, they have been very consistent through all of these really crazy transitions. They're always there. It's very interesting. Like if you look at it holistically.
Yeah, the true colors come out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are the people that, I mean, you get a clear idea and you're like, that's going to be my friend for life because they were there.
Yep.
Like this guy in the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I'm on the side of the screen in my.
You're on the screen. So speaking about the arc of your life, as you so eloquently mentioned, we'd like to, cover that a little bit if you'd indulge us. So are you from Massachusetts or am I totally wrong?
No, Massachusetts is where I grew up. I was born in Maryland, but don't remember anything about it because basically by the time I was, 1 or 2 or something like that, we were living outside of Detroit in Michigan.
Oh.
Actually very close to where George Curran lived. We found out that our childhood homes were about 4.5 miles away from each other.
Wait, what town were you in? Because I grew up right near George as well.
Lathrop Village.
I'm from around there. I have no idea where that. I have to look it up.
Yeah. Look it up. It's San Diego Drive in Lathrop Village.
Oh, you're near Southfield. Okay, Royal Oak. Yeah, that's about 15 miles from where I grew up. By the way.
Yeah. So I was there through kindergarten, and then for most of my life I was in Massachusetts. But yeah, so my whole musical experience is all around Boston Symphony stuff when I was growing up. My first real serious teacher was Doug Wright, who was playing the Empire Brass at the time, and he left the area right when I graduated from high school in 1995. Is when he went out to start in the Minnesota Orchestra. So I was lucky to have access to him. I took some lessons with Norman Bolter. I did like the Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra stuff, and from there I went to Manhattan School of Music for 2 years, studied with Dave Finlayson. And then 2 years with Joe over at Juilliard after that. And that's when I left to go to the San Antonio Symphony. 3 years there.
You're just brushing through all this stuff.
I'm banging
all these
through
big,
man. Banging through it.
Big life experiences.
Then we'll find out what's interesting after that.
Well, didn't you? I think I heard. Didn't Jim say the other day that were you guys like in youth orchestra together with Jim Nova?
He preceded me by a little bit, but we had a little bit of overlap in this group called YPO, the Youth Philharmonic Orchestra. Over that's like the NEC based one, whereas Gypso was Boston University based. And he came in, I remember at one time when I was in the trombone section, and he was filling in by reading the French horn parts in F, And I'm like, who's that trombone guy over there doing all that stuff?
Why is that so fitting? That is
I don't know.
Jim
so
gets
fitting.
confused sometimes. Maybe he didn't notice.
Did he
it.
have a soprano trombone?
I think he was dating one of the horn players or something. So he came in to do this thing.
Nothing changes, apparently. For Jim.
It is documented that he likes horn players.
Yeah.
But from there, we kind of got talking, and eventually this is where we started playing in that Nova quartet. We used to, when I was in high school, I would drive down to Jim's place, and there were 4 of us, and we would get together in this like high school gym, and that's where I played trombone quartets for the first time. And his father he humored us very well. He let us play outside of his pizza place, so we had like this Nova quartet like shirts and stuff, and it was a very cool experience because I had never heard the trombone quartet before. I didn't know anything about that. And we're playing in this big space, and I had just heard like 4 of a kind, and then all of a sudden we're reading the same Debussy Trois Chansons arrangement, and I'm just like, whoa, man, this is like blowing my mind that this kind of sound can be made with the trombone. And so that I actually consider to be a real pivotal kind of experience for me, was just going down and playing in a gym, with Jim Nova.
Did you get free pizza out of it?
I'm pretty sure we got free pizza. Anytime I was down there, they fed us. So
I never put together in my head that I knew, of course, that you studied with Joe. I guess I didn't realize you studied with David as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I want to get into this. That I don't want to go too much out of line, but you sit in a section with 2 of your teachers.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be an amazing experience.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, when I really look back at the likelihood that something like that could happen, I mean, the chances are so infinitesimally small. It's like, how could you ever end up in that situation? And it's interesting because I remember like first meeting them, like when I was like a high school kid, when I was just like, just there's someone that they never even knew that they would see again, just taking like a one-off lesson or something like that, and that sort of side of them, then studying with them regularly and that side of them. And then just sort of a colleague out in general, that's sort of like keeping in touch every so often. And then coming back to working all the time together. And what's really cool about it is the fact that we laugh a little bit about, the fact that I studied with them. Sometimes we'll recall some memories, or we'll give each other a little bit of a hard time about that. But not once has there ever been even a hint of like the teacher-student kind of thing. When they brought me to the orchestra, it's always been collegial to the nth degree, and for some relationships, it's always your teacher is your teacher, it's hard to get away from that, but with them, I've never really felt that kind of thing where they've tried to use that in any kind of negative way. We've always just had a really great working relationship, and
There's no like first year hazing where they make you like clean their trombones or something.
I mean, the first year hazing was like, all right, now that you're here, you got to buy a bass trombone, and you got until, February to be able to like sit on stage with the Philharmonic and like not wreck the section, and sound terrible. So the hazing all came for me in the form of having to learn that damn instrument, and I spent a lot of time in that practice room just like going this kind of thing, just like trying to learn the bass trombone sound.
That's a good imitation of a bass trombone.
It's my bass trombone playing, that's for sure. It's been great. I mean, I don't know. It is an amazing. If I really take a step back and I look at the fact that I'm in a section with Joe and David, 2 teachers, amazing players with these incredible careers. One of my best friends, George, playing bass trombone. One of my other very best friends, Chris Martin, playing principal trumpet. I mean, this never happens, and Richard Dean, who's playing the acting principal horn. We've played years together in Atlanta, and then almost at the exact same time came to New York. This kind of stuff never happens. It's a really kind of, I don't take it for granted, that it's an unusually great setup in that way, that there's a lot of really great people to also get to make great music with. I wish I had some stories like, someone hung a dead fish over my locker and I couldn't find it for 4 weeks or something like that. But no, it's been no hazing, just generally very pleasant.
That's pretty good. I mean, you were already established so well when you came in. I mean, that definitely helps.
But I'll be honest. I mean, I was worried when I came in if I was going, even though I had, been offered the job, I was also someone who's coming off of, at that time, an injury where I felt like maybe damaged goods, and in a sense, I was surprised they were willing to take a chance on me. That was what was going through my mind. They're not that kind of group. They're not going to just, give you a job because that's not how they work. But that's sort of my own inner self-talk it has been like trying to figure out, what do I actually, do people just look at me as this, salvaged wreck that like, it's the wounded animal that they're like, oh, that's
SS
good for
Williams.
you. Exactly. Or do people forget about it? And as time goes by, less and less people are even aware that anything happened. So it's a funny thing that the sort of personal demons that we carry around with us, right? Like we all have our things. And that's something that when I first got there, I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome going on,
I definitely want to get into the injury if you're willing to go there. But before we go there, just to touch on what you just said, from the outside, you certainly don't sound like damaged goods. And I'm not just trying to blow smoke up your ass. This is the truth. And so, I mean, I understand what's the internal versus the external, but maybe I think it's kind of like when athletes get injured, it's, of course there's a part that's like, well, they got injured, but it's not about the injury. It's about how they recover from the injury and their performance afterwards. And so many athletes, just like us, are able to recover and be just as good, if not better, afterwards, because they learn how to use their body better, so they avoid that injury going forward. And it sounds like just talking to you one-on-one or in different scenarios where you come to the retreat and talk to students, it sounds like that injury was a wake-up call for you as well. And I'd like to hear about kind of what happened and how you came through it both physically and mentally.
I mean, like a wake-up call, right? I mean, I was an obsessive practicer, where it wasn't very smart the way that I used to do things. It was just a lot of volume, and I would go through these phases where I would practice hours and then I'd go off and play like a symphony concert that night. For a long time, I was strong enough to do it. Boy, when I look back at how many hours I practiced, I was like, wow, I wish I had some more focus while I was doing it instead of just sort of like adding on, etude after etude, just with no particular goal in mind kind of thing. So coming out of that, I mean, there's two things that after the injury, I mean, I just literally couldn't practice that much anymore. I just had such diminished strength and discomfort. So I had to become much more sort of mindful about how I practiced and what I practiced. And that's really benefited me, I think, all the way through to today. Having kids, kind of, you don't have this sort of carte blanche on your time anymore in terms of you can do whatever you want. You got to be much more efficient about what you do and how you do it. And I think that had I not gone through that moment of like, trying to figure out how to bring myself back, I certainly would not be as good in being efficient with my time as I am now with the kids. But the thing about the athletes too is that we're so accustomed to seeing athletes get injured and come back, and then they talk about it, and you look at their performance, and the statistics speak for themselves if someone has truly recovered. I don't know that we've totally gone there as a community in musicians, where we look at people who have had injuries and then like don't think about it anymore. Like I think there's still a tendency to be like, oh yeah, that happened to that person, and you don't trust them as much anymore. You don't trust them to be there.
Do you feel like you're experiencing that?
I don't feel like I am now. I feel like I did when I first came back. There's a teacher who I will not name who used to send students to take lessons with me to report back on how I was doing, like whether I could still play. There was weird stuff like, and that made me very unsettled.
Yeah, obviously. No kidding. That's so unprofessional.
Why? Yeah. What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. For what end?
See if there's gonna be an opening in the Atlanta Symphony. I don't know.
Gross.
It's weird, and I can also remember too that like at the time we had some of the very first recordings of, it wasn't STS yet, but we were trying to do some stuff in Atlanta and put it up on YouTube. And I can remember reading in the comments, like, I heard Colin Williams has dystonia and this, that, and the other. And I remember getting in there. It's like, no, I don't have dystonia. And this was like BSing at the time, but no, it's a facial injury. And, I just need some time to recuperate and I'll be back good as new, blah, blah, blah. If I only knew at that point, like how long the journey would be, I just ignored everything. But it gave me, and then when I came back to play in the orchestra, people would be like, treating a little bit with kids' gloves kind of thing. So I never felt totally initially confident. Like my head game as a result of that, like I've always been someone who has like a lot of mental chatter that I for a while was very able to overcome. Coming back from this was just like, in addition to my physical game just falling apart, my mental game fell apart even harder. I mean, way harder. I mean, so to the point where even when I took my first audition back, after a long, many years away and having come back from an injury and that kind of thing, it was like a high school all-state audition level of nerves, of just not knowing what's going on, complete dysfunction, complete fail of just like all of the dry mouth, the nerves, the head going everywhere, the shakies, like all that stuff. And that was a wake-up call too. It's like, oh my God, in the middle of all this, trying to put my playing back together, my head game is a wreck, and I've done nothing for it.
And going through that experience, does it, when you mentioned, the colleagues kind of treating you with soft gloves, and going through that experience, does it kind of illuminate how much of your self-confidence, self-worth, belief in oneself is actually being fueled by others, and how much is fueled by you, and kind of has to remind you that the only true source where it's actually should be coming from?
Yeah, because I don't want to put a negative connotation on them sort of handling me with kids' gloves, because it was done out of respect and affection, and I don't have any doubt about that for my colleagues in Atlanta who were doing it at the time. But for me, because as you say, Sebastian, it's like, because my own self-worth was so low at that time, I interpreted that as not like supportive, hey, we're cheering you on, we're here for you, you're doing great. But I decided to internalize that as like, oh, they're just lying to me. They're bullshitting me. It's like, they have to be hearing what I'm hearing. This is a joke. I'm a joke. All that kind of stuff goes in there. All that imposter syndrome, super negativity would go into those kinds of decisions. So yeah, you're saying it's like someone could come up to you with literally the most pure and most earnest and authentic, like, you sound great. You really made a difference for me tonight. But if you're not able to like talk to yourself in a positive way, or have like a positive like inner game, then that will actually even be perceived as a negative or pandering kind of statement. And that's a rough world to live in. As someone who's lived in that world, that is a rough world to live in, where you are incapable of honestly receiving people's well wishes or their gratitude for your artistry. That is tough. And that's something that if I think if you ever find yourself in that situation, that is a sign that you need to take a step back and really start examining, your headspace, and whether it's just trombone related or it could be more life related, who knows? But that is an exhausting, tough place to live, and an unhappy place to live. And if I look at this experience, out of anything that has come out of it that has been positive after going through this injury, has been a recognition of that headspace has to be better. Whereas before, I used to identify completely, my entire self-worth was wrapped up in this instrument. And like the last note that I played basically told me of, like, at the end of a concert, like, if that concert went poorly, then for the rest of that night, I was a piece of crap, and the next morning try to get up and try to not be a piece of crap and play better. There's like a terribly self-destructive mindset. And I've seen a lot of people who have gone down that road too. And if anything, going through an injury, and the way that I did, you can't think like that, because it's literally becomes hopeless. I had to find a way out of it. And fortunately, Nikki came into my life right around that time and was really, really helpful and for me to think through things differently, and to recognize what was going on in my head, and to try to be more kind to myself, and to respect what I was doing a little bit more. And that really began the journey of getting away from being completely consumed by the instrument as the primary driver for who I was, versus actually having a person in there that was worthy of being cared about and was worthy of respect and compassion and whatever.
It's amazing the terrible things we can say to each other, right? Like, people, you talk about people being mean on YouTube and, social media, but compared to the things sometimes that we say to ourselves, it's unbelievable, right? And it's so much more powerful when it's ourselves saying it, because it's what we believe.
Yeah. That negative self-talk, I mean, it would take I think only like a pathological narcissist is capable of engaging with people in that way and being that mean, the way that we are to ourselves,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could say about this. But one thing I think about is this sort of self-talk, this really negative space that we can live in, can go on for a long time without even being recognized, it becomes normal. And I don't know if you know what cognitive behavioral therapy is. The person who invented it, actually from Pennsylvania, I think at Penn. I think he taught at Penn, but he was a practicing psychologist. And one of his techniques for recognizing cyclical negative thoughts was to either have like a counter, like something that you might see at like an amusement park, that you just press a button, each time you press it, it adds one number, or to have, you don't have to keep the exact number, but to have like a rubber band around your wrist. And every time you find yourself having these negative thoughts, you snap it on your wrist a little bit. It just is like, it depends on how your mind works. Some people are better with the actual numbers, a physical thing, and other people are better with that little snap on the wrist. And I tried this once when I was preparing for a recital. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how many times, even if it was a little thing like, quit screwing that up, something that's really not the worst thing to say, but it's not helpful, you know? And it was unbelievable by the end of the day. It was just like all the time, snap, 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 snap on my wrist, you know? And when I went into that experiment, I thought like I was pretty good, actually. I was like, it's not that bad. And then I realized, holy crap, I got to work on this. This is not helpful, you know? And I think if everyone did some version of that experiment, they'd find that they'd probably live in that headspace a little too much for comfort.
Yeah, it is tough, and it is debilitating, I think, as an artist, if it really can, you allow it to consume you like that, because, you know, to do what we do, it takes a certain amount of believing that you have something to offer. Like, if you're going to really like step up on that stage and own that space and say something, you know, you've got to be confident. Or you don't have to be, but it really makes the experience a lot more joyful if you believe in what you say. You know, and all of this negative feedback, I think it takes away from our ability to believe in what we're doing up there. And that makes performing much more difficult, you know?
Absolutely. And it makes me think about, you know, I love sports psychology, and it's obviously so related to any sports psychology book you read. And I was reading about Russell Wilson, the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, has like a personal psychology coach, I guess you could call it, that he talks to before every game. And his whole thing is, because you hear people all the time being like, oh, don't think negative, think positive, think positive. And if it was that easy, I think everyone would be able to do it. And it actually sometimes when you tell people that, it actually makes them more depressed because they feel like, oh, I'm not thinking positive enough, or it's difficult for them. And what actually has worked for them and what they've discovered is it's about, instead of forcing yourself to think positive, it's trying to think less negative, trying to those rubber band thoughts, just try to eliminate those or stop those more quickly. And I started that as an exercise before, you know, some recitals, and it was I found myself excited to play. Like all those fears went away. But I'm really fascinated about this concept of identity. And I feel like you had, you know, we could call it a gift of going through an experience where, you know, for most people, everyone has some sort of sense of self-worth tied to something. It's some things that are better than others. And you actually had the experience where that was taken away. And you actually had to see what it felt like for this thing that gave you so much confidence. It gave you financial stability. It gave you a life. It gave you respect. It gave you, you know, all these things. It gave you an artistic outlet. It was gone. And since your identity was so tied in it, it's like, who the fuck am I right now? You know? But by going through that, I'm fascinated, and I'd be curious to ask you, like, how much stronger does that make you? How much better of a player does it make you when you're not dependent on that?
Yeah, you know, God, man, I can remember like acutely, like when I really realized that this was going to take longer, and I was looking at my first stretch of like 4 months off of like before the doctor was going to say it was okay to come back and play. I remember just sort of sitting on my couch that night, and it was like 1:30 in the morning, and like I was trying to play video games to distract myself or something. And I remember just sort of looking up at the ceiling and like kind of laying back on the couch and being like, everything around me is there because I play trombone. And I don't know if I can do that again. The trombone was in the corner, and I was kind of looking at it as like, I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to play again in a way that will give me this everything that I have around me, the food in the fridge, the roof over my head, the car in the garage, the food for the pets, all this kind of stuff. And I had this like absolute freak out moment where that's where I really started to feel like this anxiety, just like constant, just like I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a ringing in my head just the whole time. This high energy anxiety, couldn't sleep for months as a result of that. So like coming out of that, eventually on the other side of it, looking at it, am I stronger as a performer? I don't know if I'm stronger as straight up as a performer, but I do know that as a colleague, as someone who appreciates art, as someone who looks at teaching, that I am definitely a better colleague teacher and someone who appreciates the effort goes into to making art in a totally different level. You know, I think that my empathy for everyone in life went up about 10 degrees, but through that experience, because it was, I mean, let's face it, I had a pretty easy go of things up to that point. Not to say there weren't struggles that I had, but this was the first real crisis for me. And it was a big one, an existential one in a sense, in terms of what am I going to do with my life? And I think that that's made me, at least I hope that it's made me a better teacher and a better colleague and just a better person to be around. I feel that I'm a more empathetic person. And in that sense, I think that when I play in an orchestra or in a section or something like that, I tend not to get my here we go, like the ego thing gets up and we're all like trying to, vibe each other. Kind of, we've all been in sections that have been like that, and that's exhausting. I don't do that anymore. I don't know. Maybe people are more comfortable to play with me because I'm like, I like to play, but I generally don't approach it like a competition anymore because I know I'll lose. And I'm okay. I don't need to compete. I just need to be who I am, and just this is what I have to offer. By the time I get into a competition mode at this point in my life, it's not going to go anywhere good. No one feels good after it. I just want to bring what I can, and hopefully people will still like it. And that in a funny way is an empowering kind of thing. Is to just be comfortable with who you are and bring what you bring, and just be proud of what you did, and whatever follows.
Yeah. Maybe a better performer isn't the most accurate way to put it, but more resilient performer might be the better way of putting it.
I think definitely more resilient. That's a good way of saying it, Nick, because I'm more forgiving of myself, for mistakes. I don't like to make them. Don't get me wrong. I don't sit there, and if I have a big moment that doesn't go well, I'm not like, oh shucks, too bad. No, it still pisses me off. I still get bummed out, but I used to really crater out over that stuff because that was it. That was all that's really at that point in my life, that was like all I had.
Yeah, and that sounds like a good balance, because it's like you don't want to totally lose that edge where you care when things don't go like you want, but you don't want to be so self-consumed where it's gonna ruin everything.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the things that we have to, if you're like an orchestral performer or something like that, I think that's just one of the things, facts of life. You're going to have to accept that some performances aren't going to go very well, and you're going to feel like shit about it. But the question is, you feel bad about the performance, or do you feel bad about yourself as a person? And I used to get those two conflated all the time. And now I can have a night where I'll come home and I'll be pretty bummed, but I don't go to bed thinking like, you piece of shit, I can't believe you did that. You're an idiot. No one's going to, no one's going to call you again. You suck. Those kinds of negative self-talk ideations that will creep in there. Those don't really happen anymore.
That's amazing. So you've been able to separate yourself from this trombonist a little bit. Like, I'm Colin Williams, I play the trombone. I am not Colin Williams, the trombonist, in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm not always 100% successful, but I'm so much more than I used to be, because it used to get really rough. They used to say sometimes around the ASO, it's like, uh-oh, there's Dark Colin, because something had gone bad. No. And they knew that afterwards I was going to be super bummed out, because I would just have this look on my face like, and like, or I wouldn't talk to anyone because I was so just like boiling, and that kind of thing doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I remember when I was in school, I was in school with a good friend, Kirk Ferguson, and I don't think he'd mind me telling this story. When he was in school, he was so like what you're talking about, and it would get to the point where you were in a quartet, and if you missed a note, he'd like knock over a music stand and stuff like that and get really mad. And now he's the complete opposite. He's like into meditation, I think he's a Zen Buddhist or something like that. Yeah.
And I feel like maybe on a smaller level, this is something that everyone going through the pandemic can identify as far as professional musicians that have tied their identity to their jobs and it being taken away. I mean, Nick and I have talked about this a lot and how it's felt and how we've dealt with it. But I think that is kind of a silver lining if it forces you, you know, even though it sucks, if it forces you to kind of see what's important.
I mean, I think that's the only thing we can really do. I mean, because otherwise, if you look at this thing as an experience that only provided a negative outlet, then the experience wasn't worth anything. It was just misery. When it is possible to pull something from it that will benefit you in the future, you know? And the thing is you don't want to, you know, you can't tell someone that their experience is not valid with this pandemic. But I hope that for people who have had a hard time, that when things are back to normal and they can look at this sort of retrospectively, you can still learn those lessons. You can still look at how, you know, how you went through the pandemic and still learn something from it later on, even if it was the height of suffering. Because if someone had told me this stuff in the middle of my really rough time with my injury, I wouldn't have been receptive to it. And yet looking back at it, I still took a lot from it. So I think for anyone who's really going through that right now and doesn't want to hear someone say, you know, take a positive lesson from it, you don't have to right now. You don't have to right now. But I hope that in the future that you will take the time, you know, to look back and see what you did learn through this. Because I guarantee you that almost everyone is going to have something positive that they will take from this experience, you know, something they learned that will benefit them in the future.
I mean, even if it's not something learned, but the ability to spend more time with people that you love. I mean, for me, that's been the number one thing, is being able to spend more time with family.
Yeah.
And friends last week.
And friends, when I saw Sebastian. Yeah.
Okay, so we jumped into you know, some heavy things, and I would love to just go back just a little bit and kind of walk through your career. So coming out of school, and, you know, we can talk about your experience with, you know, your teachers and everything, but you went to what's turning into the official, like, Pathway Orchestra. It seems like it's so many great players passed through the San Antonio Symphony at some point and still are. How was that experience? Was that one of your first auditions? Were you still in school when you took that audition? Or?
I was still in school when I took that audition. That was maybe my second or third audition, something like that. Maybe fourth. I don't know. I didn't take a ton of auditions before San Antonio. That's for sure. And I mean, I was so ridiculously green. That is, like, it's shocking when I look back at, like, how little I knew when I started that job. Like, I was looking at this whole thing. I have to play first trombone on all of this stuff, like 3 weeks in a row.
That's all the high notes. Trombone.
That's a little crazy, you know. Like,
yeah.
I know I was such a child. It's like really shocking to me that I was there at all. And I can actually remember that. What is it? The Pops tune. It's like a Leroy Anderson Christmas festival or something like that. All the time with the trombone, and at the end there's like a trombone melody, but it's like in one all of a sudden. And I can remember this really, like, because Steve Lang and I were there for the first time. We didn't know anything about pop shows. We'd only played our first pop shows ever, like 2 or 3, you know, like a month or 2 before this. And we're just like playing along. We think we know what's going on. And we're playing so loud and we're like so into it. And we're like a bar off and twice as slow. And the whole orchestra just sort of stops and everyone's laughing. I'm like, oh my God, what happened? And I remember at that moment, I went home later that night. And even though I was young, I was like, wow, I don't know. I don't know this music very well. I need to learn some more.
Every time we play a Leroy Anderson tune in one of the groups I play in, I lean over to Hakeem Bilal and I'm like, Leroy! It gets him every single time.
God damn,
Classic.
Leroy.
Classic.
Same person, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, Leroy Anderson, Leroy Jenkins, same person.
So who were you playing with in San Antonio at that time?
My first year was Steve Lang. Steve and I both got jobs at the same time. Actually, we both went into the symphony at the same time together. He left after a year to go to St. Louis. And Steve Dumaine was still playing like a year-long tuba position at the time, because I think Lee Hip was up in Utah Symphony. So my first, one of my very favorite memories from that whole time actually was playing Ben-Hur with that section, like doing that whole thing. And I actually have a mini disc of it somewhere, of like a totally illicit, you know, mini disc in the audience kind of recording.
You should probably explain for younger listeners, anyone under the age of 30, what a mini disc is.
I know. I mean, oh my God, wait a minute. I might even have one somewhere around here.
They were so great when they came out.
Oh, they were amazing. They're the pinnacle of technology. But if you can imagine like a tiny little like quarter-size CD trapped inside a plastic box that you put into a machine, that was basically your mini disc, what that looked like.
We're getting on the edge of having to describe what a CD is too.
I know. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, where is that? I wish I had that mini disc so I could just pull it out.
We have hundreds of mini discs and no mini disc player, so I don't know why we hold on to them. But
send it to one of those services where they put it all on a hard drive for you.
I don't know if I need to hear my lesson when I was 16 years old. I don't. But it might be interesting.
Does.
Yeah,
but I do. That's cool. I still remember the sound those things make when you turn them on, like that little spinny sound.
Yeah.
Reading the CD, little CD. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
So it sounds like a kick-ass. That
was great. That was a great section. And the next year after Steve Lang left is when Nathan Zagans came in. He played second during that year. So here's a great story here.
Uh-oh.
So Rachmaninoff symphonic dances, it's like starts off like second movement is like, big muted thing with the whole brass section.
Right.
And like I'm trying to now that I've got all this experience of being there for a year and Nathan's there, I'm like, okay, like, we're gonna be real serious now. I'm gonna try to be like professional. And I can't remember what it was, but like Nathan was like falling asleep or something on stage, like during one of the rests or that kind of thing, and because I'm such an idiot. I thought, Nathan, man, we got to be serious, got to be professional. You can't do that. We have a responsibility here. We have to take everything like really seriously. Come on, man, we got to grow up. Got to grow up, Nathan. Grow up. Take it responsible. Be serious. Can't make those kinds of mistakes anymore. And it was a total dickish thing to do. But I was, like I said, I was 23 and stupid. So, but the beautiful thing is though, is like how karmic the whole experience was, because that night, we're sitting there, and after this whole thing about be professional, get your act together kind of thing, we end the first movement, and we were about to start the second movement for this thing, and I look down. No, my frickin' mute is not there. And so I like lean over to Nathan, and I'm like, have to put my hand out, and he just looks at me, and he hands me the mute. And no further words needed to be said. Put the mute in, play. Felt like the biggest asshole of all time. He still gives me shit about it, as he should, 100%. But when I look at like one of those reasons not to be that kind of asshole, I always look back at that experience too. It's like, you say this kind of stuff, but you're gonna be that guy at some point.
So was it that you forgot the mute and he noticed and went and got yours, or did he play?
There was no time. It was a concert. There was no time. So I noticed that the mute was missing. And I looked down at his mute, and we basically knew, because I was on the lead voice, it would be easier to hide with him in the middle. So he handed me his mute.
I see. I misunderstood. I thought he had your mute in addition to his own and was giving you.
No. Like I totally forgot my mute 100% in that that very professional kind of way. So after this whole degree of the thing about professionalism, I'm the one who like leaves my freaking mute off stage, for the gig, and has to ask him, who I just was an asshole to borrow the mute. So
there's in the Met Opera turned up parts in the second act, it says don't forget your mute in the bass trombone part, and then it says in huge letters, this is for you, Nick, because so many performances, because the first act there's no mute, and then there's mutes for the second and third act. In so many like performances, I'd have to run out and go get my mutes. I'd forget it, and so eventually, I think Weston wrote that in my part for Nick.
That's funny.
Yeah, whoopsies.
It's hard to be like a hard ass, because it's like you gotta be able to back it up like 100% all the time.
No one can.
No, it gets exhausting. That's just that's a tough way to live, and no one wants to be your colleague if you're going to be that way anyway. So why do it?
Well, it's fascinating hearing this story, because like every section you've gone to, you've brought colleagues along with you. I mean, not like that you brought them, but you got to play with Nathan in Atlanta, right? So like, and now you're in the Philharmonic, and George is there with you too. It's like, it's kind of rare.
Really, really crazy, looking at it from George's perspective, because Nathan was one of the finalists for that Philharmonic job too. So George had just left Atlanta with the section of me and Nathan. And then even though he was still too new in the orchestra to be voting, but he had to play in the section round. So he's doing this section round with his like two former colleagues. I always wondered what that was like for him to like to sit through that, and how weird that whole experience must have been.
Probably nerve wracking because
I'm sure
you're both friends.
Yeah,
I know. I've always said I actually, in a way, not totally, but in a way, I get more nervous sitting on the committee than I do playing, because I just feel like I know what it's like to be one of those people, and it's just like you want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and it's just you feel like, this is so uncomfortable. I don't like this. I want everyone to be gainfully employed, you know.
Yep.
And obviously that's just not the way our world works.
You get a job and you get a job.
Thanks,
We're
Oprah.
gonna start our own trombone group.
Yeah, let's do it. I don't know how we're making money doing it, but let's do it.
So Atlanta was the big audition after. So you were in San Antonio for about 3 years?
3 years. Yep.
And then Atlanta came along. And how do you still remember the whole preparation process? And
I do, I mean, I was practicing all the time over at San Antonio. I remember I would, after if I just played the first half of a concert, I would always stay in afterwards and be practicing in the spaces there, like in some of the locker rooms or something underneath the hall. I would, at the time, I could, because I had an apartment, I couldn't practice late there. So I used to go over to UTSA, and I would drag with me like this giant suitcase, basically, of CDs, and like an external CD player that I could plug into my boombox, and I would play along with a lot of these things too, because I was trying to get a feel for what these orchestra excerpts really sounded like. And I realized at the time that I just, having played through some stuff early on, it's like, wow, I just don't understand enough about how the trombone is supposed to fit into these pieces. And the only way I could really figure out how to do that, in addition to playing by myself, was doing a ton of playing along with the recordings that I had, to try to get an idea for what did I want in tone color, what was going on around me, and how can I best simulate that in an audition. And then I would do like lots of mock auditions. If people were wandering around the UTSA, sometimes there'd be someone else there practicing, and I'd just play for them or something like that. It would be, that kind of thing. I went out to Round Top, where Per Brevig was teaching over the summer, and played some lessons for Per, in preparation for that audition. And a number of other things. Like, I just tried to play for as many people as I could. And I think that was really important. In addition to your individual practice, mock auditions are so essential for any actual successful audition you're going to take. I mean, everyone has their own sort of method, about like how you practice excerpts, and you can talk about that all day. But one really common thing is that I don't think anyone, no matter what your method is going to be successful unless you do a tremendous amount of mock auditions, because you have to get used to what it's like to be able to deliver under that level of perceived scrutiny. Even for the most confident people, it's still not the most comfortable thing ever to do an audition. So you got to get used to what it's like with someone up there who's like really sort of like picking on every, like where you can imagine that they're going to be picking on every last little thing you do. And for me, when I've done really successful auditions, the mock audition part of it has been much better, and many more of them, versus when I've not done it, I've always felt less comfortable.
And playing for other instruments outside of the brass family. I remember playing a mock audition once for the flute studio at Juilliard, and it was the bass Ramones studio playing for them, and Fountains of Rome was on it, and we get done playing it, and this one flute player goes, "I assume it's supposed to sound like you can't play it." And I was
That's
like,
awesome.
And all of us were just like, oh, so dejected, just like, oh, that's horrible.
You're really depicting the struggle that
Yeah.
he was trying to show.
It was almost from like the mouth of babes sort of thing. It's just such an innocent comment that just broke us,
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, but seriously, like if you play for people that are outside your instrument group, they even if it's subconscious, we have an understanding of what another trombonist is doing or another brass player, and we give a little leeway for that. They don't have that built in, just like we don't for their instruments. So I think that, they don't have a bias, and they don't have a background of like our instrument. So they're going to be brutally honest without meaning to be brutal.
Yep.
So you win the job. Just fast forward through an intense audition process.
Mm-hmm.
I showed up and I won. I hear so many stories. It's funny, like when you hear people recount, like, "Oh, I took this audition and I was offered the job." I'm like, okay, cool. And make it sound like it was just a walk in the park, like we're doing right now. But I imagine part of you, when you won this job and you were there for 12 years, did you think like, oh, this is probably where I'm going to be the rest of my career?
When I first got there, I was very interested, okay, what's the next thing? Like, what's going to open up, this, that, or the other. just because I had this weird, we built it into our heads that we have this like professional obligation that when a on paper bigger job opens up, that you go take that job because you're supposed to. That's your other job, is to keep looking for the bigger job. So you got the job you're doing now, but your other job is to get ready for that one that you might happen down the road. I don't know that I ever really thought that's where I was going to be forever, but I know that I was in a situation where I was quite happy. That there was the life in Atlanta was very good. It was very like for what that orchestra pays versus the cost of living, all those kinds of things. It was a really nice situation. But after I got injured, I think for a while I felt like I would just be lucky to be able to even just do that job for the rest of my career. To rehabilitate and stay there. I never thought I would take another audition again. In a sense, after that, I wasn't sure I was ever going to make it to the orchestra again. And when all those things started happening, then I allowed myself to kind of look a little bit farther away. And some of it was personal. A lot of my family is from this area. The New York Phil was an orchestra that I always just loved when I was younger. When I was in Boston, I remember listening to all these Bernstein recordings of like the mid '80s Mahler 2, Mahler 3. Those kinds of things, and I went to school in New York, so I had this sort of sound affinity for this orchestra, this sort of built-in love of the orchestra from when I was much younger. So when the Philharmonic thing came around and I'd been recovered enough, I was like, yeah, I want to see if I can do this. This would be a job that I would go to. And then honestly, that's when the ASO had a management team that was very, I think, negative and poisonous for the symphony. We went through the first of the 2 lockouts that happened down there. And that honestly just made me want to leave at that point, because I was like, you know what? If this orchestra is going to be run in this way, then it's not someplace I want to stay. Fortunately, they have a different team now, but at that time it was really dark, and they took a huge hit out of the orchestra in terms of number of weeks and those kinds of things. It was really an unpleasant experience, and it kind of soured me on the place at the time.
Was that happening at all, coinciding with dealing with the injury?
It was years after, I would say. It was years after the injury. During the time of the injury, things were actually going still very well in the symphony. So
yeah, that stuff is so poisonous. It's dealing with labor issues and stuff like that. That's a whole can of worms. I don't want to go down it necessarily.
Because that's a big can of worms in New York right now. That's for sure. Ugh.
Yep.
Let's just make this a 4-hour podcast. Let's just get it all out, Colin.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah. And you're being on the committee during this time, like, Nick and I have talked about that a lot. It's such a cross to bear, and it's something you wouldn't wish on anyone, but it's like something someone's got to do. Fall on the sword in a thankless job.
Yeah, I've always felt that if you're going to be in an orchestra, that you should at some point serve on a committee, because I think it's imperative for you to sort of understand, at least to a certain degree, how the institution functions. And when you're on the committee, you have a much more clear view of that. Also, I think you should serve because that way you have some understanding of how challenging committee work can be, so that I feel like you could be a little bit more understanding of when an orchestra committee is in the middle of grind. You understand what they're going through, and you can try to be there to support them. I always felt like that when I was not on the committee, and serving on the committee, I just sort of felt like it was an opportunity to try to give something back to my colleagues, in that most sort of union forward kind of way. Like you just want to help as much as you can. I kind of lost the lottery on this being part of the committee this last time around with COVID coming through town. I basically rolled a 0, or I rolled a 1 like 12 times in a row, apparently, like in order to get all of missed my saving throws and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It was incredibly unlucky to have to navigate this crisis and to be.
It's like, yeah, I'll volunteer on like a non-negotiating year and like knock out my year or 2 on the committee, and then something happens.
Yeah. I served for 3 terms on New York City Ballet's committee, and what you said about everyone needing to serve or should serve, I agree with that 100%, because I've gotten so many angry emails or voicemails from colleagues, which, first of all, I don't understand that, but a lot of it comes down to not really understanding the language of our contract and not understanding how the relationship with management works. And it's like, either if you educated yourself on, not you, the general you, educated yourself on the contract and understanding what the process is like, I think a lot of these angry emails would not be written because they're out of line, not from a social standpoint, but they're out of line because it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about the thing that you're angry about. It's not in the purview of our contract. I don't have that authority, you know? So I think that's a big part of it. It's just, like you said, understanding how it works.
Yeah. Like say, if we go down this road too much longer, it's going to turn into a 4-hour podcast. So
hey, we'd love to hang out with you for 4 hours.
Yeah, maybe the after ones with Jack Daniels involved.
Yeah. Definitely. We could have recorded some of those conversations we had at the retreat for sure.
Well, maybe not all of them.
Well, something about time traveling. There's some time traveling conversation.
Oh God, I wish I could leave that in so much. I wish.
Oh my gosh.
There's like 5 people listening to this that will know that reference.
Yeah. That's all that needs to know about that.
Oh my God.
But creatively speaking, besides the negotiations, it seems like the Philharmonic's been efforting to do some things. Like I saw some really cool videos, like you guys playing with the on the water and some things going on. I mean, it's kind of been an opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think the Philharmonic we're going through a process right now where we're trying to reimagine how we can be engaged in civic life. You know, we really, it comes at like the crossroads of a lot of different things. You have the pandemic, you have the social justice movement that's going on, and this sort of really reevaluating how orchestras like us, who for so long have been, you know, these sort of very white monolithic kinds of institutions for most of our history, how do we now engage in a meaningful way with our city, you know, and our you know, how do we be good custodians and good citizens within the place that we live? And so these bandwagon projects, I think, have come out of this idea. And as we as an institution are looking forward, trying to develop better community partners, we don't want to do these kinds of things where, you know, in the most pejorative kind of way, you could talk about cultural colonialism, where this is very much what orchestras used to do. Be like, here we are, we're our orchestra, we're deigning to play in this high school gym. And aren't you lucky to hear some Dvorak? Oh, it was so nice to see you. See you never. And then you take off and that's it. Like you just drop whatever you're doing into saying it as outreach, as if the community ever asked for you to do that or was even interested in that in the first place. And then you take off and never come back. I mean, that is the way that it seems like. I mean, obviously that's grossly simplified and probably unfair to a lot of institutions. And yet that is the perception that exists for the way that orchestras have operated for a long time in terms of like, how do you engage with people who aren't coming to your concerts? What we're trying to do right now is to be like going in, having real conversations and saying, listen, you know, this is what we do. And, you know, this is ways that we might be able to help. Is there anything that we can do? Let's do a project together. Are you interested in having us in your community? And if so, then what can we do? How can we bring our resources and our skills to amplify your message? You know, how can we help? How can we show that we're part of this community? And what can we do together to try to create something that's not been done before that could really be something beautiful for the city? And I think that's how we're trying to engage in these kinds of collaborations going forward is in a very non-traditional way. Like, how can we as Philharmonic musicians be part of the city in which we live and in which we perform? And I think it's a way of kind of reimagining what's possible and how orchestras work with, you know, with the community in which they're located. And so I'm hoping that we're always learning. You know, there's clearly we're going to have some things go wrong, probably one way or the other logistically. But I think that from what I've seen, all the musicians are super open to it and super flexible. And we're really just trying to make this thing, you know, as meaningful and true and collaborative in the sense of the word, you know, in the true sense of the word, as opposed to the way things maybe have been done in the past.
Yeah, it's the New York Philharmonic. It's like, what an opportunity to set an example and lead in this type of process. You're in one of the most diverse, fascinating cities on the planet. You have tons of resources, and it's so cool that, you know, you guys can set an example for a lot of other groups.
Yeah, I hope that we can keep going in this direction, and who knows what'll come out of it. But you know, it's you know, art is made at the crossroads, right? You know, you think about like food, for instance. Like, where's the greatest food from? It's from places that have been like crossroads of cultures and not necessarily monoliths. And I think there's a lot that we as an institution, that if we're really open to being part of that cultural exchange, you know, who knows what we'll come out with and what will happen as a result of it. I remain really optimistic that something really beautiful can come from this. So
Awesome.
That's awesome. Another thing, I guess, branch of this is the renovation of the hall, and it's starting early. And so I mean, this is good for you guys to kind of get a running start at that too.
yeah, I mean, it's funny. It is. They'd raised all of the money right before the pandemic hit, so they actually had cash in hand. And looking at it, it was going to be a 4-year process that they can compact down to 2. And so half of it's already gone in terms of, from the pandemic, and we couldn't do anything anyway, but they could work. And so David Geffen Hall now, it basically looks like a concrete shell. I mean, everything's been ripped down. There's no balconies. There's no stage. It is literally like a concrete box with like cranes and stuff in it. It's crazy. So it's happening, and we'll get into that space much faster, which I think is going to be really important for the orchestra. And it could be really nice as a way to sort of say, hey, New York is back, we're all back, and check out this new space, and it'll host a lot of other things aside from just us. But ultimately for me on a personal level, I mean, it's going to be amazing to be in that space, after it's redone, because all the designs we've seen look amazing.
Yeah, those mock-ups look amazing.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated with how a space can shape how an orchestra sounds traditionally, because there's so many factors, of course, with history, with players, with cultural influences, with conductors. But I think a very underappreciated part of how an orchestra forms their sound is their space. And Avery Fisher, David Geffen, huge space, sometimes not the easiest to hear across the stage. The New York Philharmonic has cultivated such a big sound, and sometimes maybe you don't hear that resonance. Maybe you create more sustain, for whatever reason. Have you thought about how maybe the sound of the New York Philharmonic might change with all these new acoustics?
Oh yeah, it's funny. Dave Finless and I were just talking about this the other day. That our suspicion is that we're going to have to really dial things back a bit, because the hall is getting smaller. They're taking some seats out. They're moving it a little farther forward. We're going to have seating behind the orchestra now.
Cool.
They're making many more accommodations to make the space much more reverberant and lively. So if all of that comes to pass, I mean, acoustics is like some science and some magic and some luck, right? I mean, so hopefully it'll land where they want it to land. And if they do, I think the way we play will have to fundamentally shift a bit. I think this sort of, like, as you say, the big sound, the huge is probably not going to work in that space in the same way. So we may have to make some different equipment choices. We probably will just conceptually be able to chill out a little bit in some passages. I mean, there's who knows what kind of overtones we're going to want to really generate in that space. And we won't know until we get in there. But I think for sure it's going to be a little bit more I don't think we're going to be able to put out the sheer volume, sheer decibels as we do now sometimes, and have it work in that space. That's our gut feeling based on our conversations. And that'll be nice, actually, because I think this orchestra has sounded the best when we've been on tour in sort of warmer, more sensitive kinds of spaces. It really can sound incredibly beautiful. And we never get to hear the orchestra like that because we're always in the space that we've been in.
Mm.
That's exciting to think about. I remember Finless in lessons, because I studied with him for a couple of years too, and he was saying how there was one point in the past where the Philharmonic had an option to set Carnegie Hall as the hall, and he just says, like, he's just curious how different the Philharmonic would sound if that was your main hall.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would be a totally different animal.
But okay, so Nick, you want me to shoot off some final questions and
rapid fire?
I've been adding up. We need like a sound effect when we go into rapid fire.
I got the one. Yeah, exactly, I got that one.
But yeah, I have just a few questions. I've already asked you a lot of them. One thing that just a functional nuts and bolts thing that I think could help a lot of young players is, do you see something that really contributed to the injury happening that you would recommend as far as the way people play, the way people practice, the frequency that people should be a little more wary of to hopefully prevent such an injury?
Yeah, I mean, with the injury, I think it was a little bit of some bad habits and some bad luck and overuse, like just playing too much all the time. I think be respectful of when you have performances. You like to not try to amp up really hard on the same day or even the day before. That if you have a big show, that you don't overdo it and leave yourself in a weakened position, to go play. No athlete is ever going to go like blow it all out in the gym, and then show up and like try to have the on game day. You know, it's like an NFL player is not going to wake up and at 5 a.m. like just like trash themselves in the gym and then come in and expect to perform their best or not be more susceptible to injury on game day. I think, and I think a similar kind of thing can happen for a lot of brass players. You know, be mindful of your practice. Like have practice with intention. Don't just practice for hours. Don't practice for minutes like I would do sometimes. I would be like, oh, I've only practiced 2 hours today. I need to get another 2 in before I can go warm up for my 45 minutes before I have play pictures at an exhibition or some stupid thing like I used to do. Ooh. You know, it's like that kind of mentality is no good. So being practicing thoughtfully and with intention and with goals, I think is really important. That would have kept me out of a lot of trouble, I think.
You ever think about why you wanted to practice so much? I mean, obviously you loved it, but did you think any part of it was tied to anxiety or feeling like imposter syndrome, like you need to be playing this much or you're not yourself?
Yeah, I think so. There was some part of it that, like, when I was practicing, at least I had more control over what was going on at that given moment. And then also I wanted to get better and better and better and better. For what, I wasn't sure yet. And I think maybe having that in mind would have been better. But, you know, just to prove that I was awesome or something, I don't know. It was something very childish and very, very stupid that's not a good way to go about doing it, for sure.
How often did you like tell yourself like, hey, you're doing pretty good here. Like, hey, you're principal of the Atlanta Symphony. That's pretty awesome.
It was always like, yeah, you've got this job, but you could do this or that. Or it was like, yeah, oh yeah, you got this thing. Any, you know, like it would basically completely devalue or be dismissive of the job that I had. Not because it wasn't a great job, but because there was a part of me that wanted to diminish or devalue, didn't want to give credit or recognition to my own accomplishments, so that I would basically be in that position. It's like, oh yeah, you got this job, like no big deal. Any idiot can walk off the street and do this, you know, but you should be doing that, or you should be doing that, or like, you know, you should be getting a call for that, or you should have gotten called for that. And it didn't happen because you're not good enough. So you better practice some more. That was sort of like that very negative, self-destructive kind of headspace I think I used to live in.
And you see so many of the most successful people kind of have had that mindset, because it's like they've had something, even though it's maybe not the most positive, constructive thing, but there's something to push against, or there's something that's always fueling you, which is like, you know, it's helping me get to this place, but like, am I enjoying this place? So I don't know. It's so funny, because I remember I had this like bootleg, I think I may have mentioned this to you at the retreat. I had this bootleg video of you playing a mock audition when I was in undergrad. So it had to be like shortly after you won the Atlanta position. And I would listen to that thing like every day, or watch it every day, and just be like, holy crap, I have to get my excerpts sounding like this. And it would just be like my model. And at the same time, you're like beating yourself up, you know?
Yeah, it's funny how that is. You know, you're a sports psychology guy, so I'm going to throw a dated reference out there. But, you know, I always think of a little bit about like John McEnroe, someone who was fueled by like anger and like very negative kind of things. And sometimes I wonder, like, what could he have achieved if his motivation was from a slightly more positive, empowering, as opposed to this exhausting kind of way, this anger, negative kind of motivation? Because you can get a lot of motivation. You can get better on this, but eventually it will fail you, I think. I think no one has gone through life on anger alone, and by the time they get to retirement, can look back and say they enjoyed or had a great career. They just will have gotten through it. And you're still left just as angry and unfulfilled at the end as you were at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So if you can recognize that this is a thing that's happening, then it's a good time for you to sort of step back and really try to suss out what some more positive ways to motivate yourself might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're expending so much energy doing that.
It's exhausting.
Right. It makes me think about Roger Federer, because apparently he was a huge hothead.
Yeah. Just
so angry all the time, and had talent, but just couldn't like channel it. And then a coach came along and really got him to be so zen. And we just see him as this like guy who shows no emotion, but really he's just channeling all of that energy into like strategy and everything, which I think is amazing, but not easy to pull off. Okay. So next question. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Advice to your 18-year-old self.
Oh God. Maybe lay off the beer.
That doesn't appeal. Like, come on.
Yes, I know. But I think for me, it would be to go see more concerts while you're in New York. I spent so much time in the practice room and doing all those things. I didn't see nearly enough of the city or the cultural things. And if I had gone to more concerts and gone to more museums and really taken advantage of all the time that I had as an 18 to 22-year-old in school to go do these things, rather than just squeezing out another 30 to 40 minutes of practice during a weekend or something like that, I think it would have been better served. I would have been a more complete kind of person to really take advantage of that experience and that freedom you have to really better yourself on more than just the trombone, So that's the thing that when I look back at my time in New York, the thing that I feel that I did not take nearly enough advantage of was all the stuff around me. I didn't go to enough jazz concerts. I didn't practice or listen to jazz enough. I didn't get into that and try to understand that art form. I didn't go to nearly enough Philharmonic. I didn't go to any metropolitan operas, or I didn't see any of the ballets. I didn't enrich myself in that way when I had the time. And now it's much harder to do it because I'm performing, so it's a little bit of a regret. I wish I had seen much more of it and gotten myself that experience and done more listening live than I did when I was in school. And that's that part of your education. It cannot be overestimated as to how valuable it is. So.
Do you have a musical experience that you look back on that was the most impactful or memorable to you?
I can have one where it should have been more of a wake up call than it was. But in San Antonio, we did a chamber concert and I played Bluebells of Scotland on it. And I remember afterwards, I was like, oh, it just wasn't so clean and blah blah blah. I chickened out and go for the high F at the end. It was lame. You suck. Blah blah blah. And this older gentleman came up to me. And he had tears in his eyes. And he's like, I just want to say thank you so much. My father was a trombonist. And we used to listen to Arthur Pryor from his recordings with John Philip Sousa. And he actually used to practice this piece from time to time, and with you playing it and me hearing it again, it just brought me back to my childhood. And I haven't thought about my father like this in so long. And just thank you. And I'm like, this is like an 85-year-old guy, with tears in his eyes. I was like, wow, boy, did I miss the boat on what's going on in this room, And
then he was like, but why didn't you play the high F?
Yeah, and it's like, but now that I think about it, that F, man, you know what? Actually, this really sullies the whole memory of my dad. And honestly, I'm pretty disappointed in you.
Exactly.
No, I mean, so that was one of those things is that as a performer, even though you have all this inner dialogue, you can't possibly know what you're bringing to someone else. And if you just do it earnestly and try really hard, you're probably going to reach someone in a way that you can't even imagine.
Well, I like that. Okay, so this is a question that I like to ask all of our guests. What is something that young students should do more of when they're in school?
Listen. I am shocked at when I talk about pieces or orchestral, pieces that they're even supposed to be playing, how little they know of the piece that they're playing, how little the context. Can they even sing the part that comes right before this or afterwards? Yeah, I'm shocked at how little some young students really have taken the time to really go out there and hear, great recordings and great other musical experiences, like just what else is out there. And also, for those who are listening in the orchestral world, expand out a little bit, listen to other genres of music so that you can borrow some of the music making, because listening to if you're not listening not only to the pieces that you're supposed to be performing for excerpts, but if you're not going out and listening to other genres of music that you can then borrow ideas from, you're totally missing out on a huge amount of information. Sometimes we get so myopic on listening to this trombone recording, this trombone recording, this trombone recording, that we don't open up our ears to the great opera singers, to the great pop singers, to the great, listen to Freddie Mercury and how he spins a phrase or spins a sound. Listen to how Frank Sinatra does something, listen to how Christine Goerke does something. Those are all things that we could learn from, that if we don't spend the time really listening and getting into it and get too myopic, then you'll miss out on.
Awesome. And I by the way, I highly recommend everyone hear Colin's solo CD, Ash, recently came out. I spent some time listening to the whole thing today. I really, really enjoyed it. Really amazing stuff.
Thank you.
Dude, it's always so easy to talk to you, and it's always a joy. And I think we'll see you down at the ITF.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We'll be there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We might share a beer.
Maybe.
I don't share, by the way.
We'll get 3 straws.
Like Lady in the Tramp.
Sure.
Is it weird to say that I want to be a Colin Williams when I grow up?
A Colin Williams?
Yep.
I don't think that's weird.
Well, then I'm going to say it. I want to be a Colin Williams when I grow up.
I think there could be much worse people to be.
That is true. Like a Sebastian Vera.
Man. Self-esteem meter just like took a nosedive right there.
That was mean. I apologize. That's nothing that a Colin Williams would do.
Rosie Alexander, my mom, is not going to be pleased with that comment.
Well, she likes me enough that I think our relationship can stand the blow, you know?
Yeah, she's actually visiting me in a couple days.
I know. You're going to get showered with mom hugs and clean laundry, I assume.
Yeah, just like college.
Just like college. She's going to bring a tray of tamales or something like that to feed you.
Oh, wow. That'd be cool.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, my house is definitely going to be the most clean it's ever been when she shows up. So
it was pretty good looking when I was here last week. I got to say, it's looking pretty handsome.
I appreciate that. For a single guy living in a big house, like, you know, it takes a lot of work, but it's not perfect, but I keep it presentable.
I was most impressed with, let's call it a shrine to your Peloton. Very, very polished area.
Have we talked about the Peloton on
It's been a while since we mentioned that you have a Peloton, which that's the first step of being a Peloton owner, is telling everybody about it.
Honestly, I think you bring up the Peloton way more than I do, for the record.
Well, you know, I could out some other people that have a Peloton. Here's looking at you, Weston Sprott.
Weston Sprott, Jeremy Muller's got one.
And Jeremy Buckler has one.
Right. I mean, honestly, it's been great for me. If anyone listening is on Peloton, follow me. I'm Rib Knight is my name. Rib Knight. Knight like Knights of the Round Table.
This outro is sponsored by Peloton.
Oh, man. If we could get Peloton to sponsor us.
They're having a pretty big PR hit right now, so... Hey,
they'll be fine.
If you have a Peloton treadmill, don't put your baby under it.
All I'm saying is buy that stock while it's low. Going straight to the moon.
Like Warren Buffett told me at a Long John Silver's once, buy low, sell high.
Warren Buffett is the type of guy that would doesn't he still eat at McDonald's?
His wife puts aside the exact amount of money for his breakfast every morning, which is, I think, a Coca-Cola and an Egg McMuffin at McDonald's.
Dream big, Warren.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that. It's like, it's kind of trolling me. Like, I'm getting the same breakfast. Like, okay, yeah, look at you. Good for you.
He's a cheapskate, that's for sure.
But, I mean, he's actually incredible when you read his philosophies and everything. All right, well, I always love hanging out with Colin. And I think we got kind of deep there. And I really enjoyed it, talking about identity. And I think it's important for all of us. You know, it's easy to be consumed by what you do, especially if you've found success. And ultimately, that's finite, you know, because it can be taken away, or, you know, it's taken away this year for different kind of reasons.
No kidding.
So really, like, learning who you are, and that's a lifelong pursuit. I think we're all trying to, like, always find deeper levels of that, but is always a good thing.
Yeah, and then there's always like those revelations that happen in small little bits over time, and then there's huge events that make you face yourself, and it happens more at once. And those are obviously more jarring, but either way, it's important. We're always finding ourselves. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian when I was a little kid.
Really?
Yep.
You never told me that.
I love animals.
You got the beard for it.
Veterinarians have beards?
I just feel like if I had a cat that was not feeling well, seeing you, I would just feel like, you know, my cat's in good hands.
You know, I think the thing that I wouldn't be able to do very well as a veterinarian is when you have to express their backside glands. If you're a dog owner, you know what I'm talking about. That's gross.
Have you had to do that?
Wow, we pay someone to do it. It's pretty gnarly.
Imagine that being your job, like you're a specialist.
I know Kyle Covington, who's principal trombone of San Diego, he told me this is a couple months ago. He was doing that for his dog, and it exploded all over him, his clothes and face and everything, and he just jumped in the shower and started crying. I can't remember the crying part, but I believe he did start crying.
It's weird. I can hear everyone turning our podcast off right now.
Exactly. So all right, we're going to get away from backside fluids.
Oh my God. That sounds like the worst band name ever.
Yeah.
One thing Colin got me thinking about a little bit was, and we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but just I think something that a lot of people can maybe identify with, especially now, is getting back into shape, especially if, you're getting out of school and you're coming into the summer, or, you haven't been working as much as normal. And I feel like this is one area where I feel very confident about my experience in this area as far as coming back from taking breaks, as someone who grew up tending towards the lazy side at moments, but always needing to get back in shape quickly. I had a lot of experience doing this, and I've come up with a lot of opinions on the way that I'd like to share with you. And this is just how I feel about it, and it's worked for me.
Everybody, crisscross applesauce. Uncle Sebby's telling a story.
You ever do the thing with little kids?
No.
And then they clapped it back? Oh, that's every kid under the age of 6 knows that. If you just do that around them, they'll do it. So yeah, I think the biggest thing to understand is I think the problem that most people have is trying to come back too fast. And this is the same as if you're working out or anything. It's always going to feel good on the first day back. Even if you've taken a decent amount of time off, the first day is always going to feel kind of the best because, your muscles haven't been worked. And I'm sure a lot of people experience like, man, I sound pretty damn good. But it's the second day that sucks. So you feel really good and you end up doing too much. And then your muscles don't have the endurance to recover. And so they're really broken down. It's going to take a longer time. So the second day is awful. So you're like, if you try to cram in like a really heavy day, first day back for like a gig you have the next day, it's probably not going to feel awesome. The most important thing to do is don't do too much. So think about not pushing the range or the dynamics as much as you want to, maybe touch those areas, but think about sustained things. You're talking long tone scales, all the simple stuff. Lip slurs, feeling good, getting the blood moving, getting the muscle building again. And then just slowly over time, expanding your range, expanding the dynamics, expanding the variable of how long you play, and be consistent with it.
Yep.
And it's way better to do 10, 15 minutes every day than like one day where you're doing a ton than skipping a lot when you're trying to get back in shape.
The best practice session today is the one that you can continue doing tomorrow.
The more you know.
Exactly. Well, pivoting slightly, but still on the topic of Colin, I was telling you this, that, he talked about himself being damaged goods or feeling like damaged goods. And, I don't see it that way. I mean, sure, of course, his feelings and experiences are valid. But one thing I've noticed over the years is how many colleagues want to play for Colin to understand how he went through what he went through and came back so strong. And to me, that's pretty much the opposite of damaged goods. It's more like, how did you do that? You're like, you have a superhuman power. So Colin, you're not damaged. We love you just the way you are.
Does he really think he's damaged, or was he just talking about like he's afraid that might be a perception?
I think it's more of a fear than it is a reality, So
yeah,
I'm just here trying to debunk that fear.
Yeah, and if anyone for any reason thinks that, go listen to his CD Ash, and you will quickly be reminded
yeah,
what he's capable of.
Here's another example of Colin being just superhuman. Like we do at the retreat, we usually have, long days and then late nights. A lot of the reason is some of our guest artists come in and they're here for a limited amount of time. So we want to maximize the time with them. We'll sometimes go out and have dinner / drinks at the local tavern here. But we had a late night one night, maybe 1:30 in the morning or something like that. And Colin packed in a lot of extra lessons. So he had a lesson something like 7:30 in the morning, which even on a full night of sleep is crazy. And this student came in and they're working on Alsa Sprach. And
at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah. And the student's just not quite getting what Colin's saying. And so the student says, can you just play it for me? And apparently Colin just goes, okay, let's do it. And then nailed it to the wall, of course. But I think that's incredible. I mean, that's hard to play, at 3 in the afternoon when you're fully fresh, let alone 7:30 in the morning, underslept,
It's funny because it always turns into, we just have a good time. And a lot of these people we haven't seen in a long time, and everyone's usually really busy. And so we pack in, we work really hard and we have a good time too. We go on the boat. There's a lot of great places to eat, a lot of great people to see. And I think Colin, he'd been coming off a busy stretch, and has kids at home. And I think initially he was like, I'm just going to keep my head down, go to bed early every night.
The retreat had other plans for him.
We had a very awesome time. I just wanted to read this super sweet review we got from TDY41. I guess that's Teddy. And I don't know. It's these, especially on rough days, Nick and I are just saving these. It really inspires us to work and keep creating these things for you guys. But he wrote a review and then he wrote an update. He said, I just discovered this podcast a few days ago. I started off at the beginning and up to the 4th episode. Wow, I am so inspired. Thank you guys. Update. I am at Nick's interview and everything so far is absolutely fantastic. This podcast gets better with every episode. You guys have nailed it. I'm an amateur in my 60s. Good for you. That is learning so much from you guys. Wow. Obviously, that feels really good to read, but it's so great to... We talk to people that are professionals. We talk to people that are students. We talk to people that are young students and amateurs. And that's what we want this to be, a resource for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got another message, both of us, who said that he could write 1,000-word essay about how great the Trombone Retreat podcast is. I don't think I could write a 1,000-word essay about anything. So
is that double spaced or single spaced?
I think we're looking at 1.2 space.
Oh wait, that doesn't matter because it's 1,000 words.
Yeah, see, that's how good we are at essays.
As a college professor, sometimes like when you get essays, like you see all the same tricks that you did as a college student. Like everyone knows the Courier new font trick.
Well, and also you can write just gibberish at the bottom of the page in white, so you can't see it, and it adds word to the word count.
I've never tried that.
Don't try that, kids. I'm just joking.
Oh man!
How to Be Lazy in School by Nick Schwartz.
Everyone ignore everything we just suggested.
Exactly. Times New Roman all the way.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a rating and review on iTunes. If you want to leave a question or topic you'd like us to discuss, we may answer it on the podcast. Follow us at Trombone Retreat on the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the YouTubes, the Twitters, and our website, tromboneretreat.com, where you can also join our mailing list. Also, stay tuned for updates about the upcoming Trombone Retreat coming up in August. And feel free to shoot us an email at tromboneretreat@gmail.com, as we love hearing from you. On Instagram, follow Nick at basstrombone444 and myself at js.vera. Also, stay tuned for practice hangs as we plan to do our online Zoom hangs again and get back in shape with us.
And if you're feeling down, plant some lilies.
Write your mom a handwritten letter. Go ahead and treat yourself.